The old man sat quietly on the small wooden chair inside his modest living room. The walls around him were bare, with only a few fading photographs that told the story of his younger days. One showed him in uniform, standing tall and proud, medals glinting in the sun. Another showed him surrounded by fellow soldiers, all smiling after a long and difficult mission. Back then he had been strong. Back then he had felt that his country stood behind him. But now, many years later, he felt forgotten. His chest rose and fell slowly, every breath a struggle. His legs had grown weak, and even the short walk from his chair to the kitchen left him exhausted. He had been sick for months, but he had avoided going to the hospital because he knew what awaited him. Bills he could not pay. His pension was small, barely enough for rent and a little food. Medicine was a luxury he could not always afford. That morning his condition worsened. His neighbor, who often checked in on him, noticed his pale face and trembling hands. "You need help," the neighbor said softly, concern filling his voice. The old man tried to wave it off, insisting he would be fine, but the truth was clear. He was not fine. His body was shutting down, and without proper care he might not survive. Finally, the neighbor called for an ambulance. The ride to the hospital was a blur for the old man. The sirens echoed in his ears, and as he lay on the stretcher he thought about his past. The nights spent in cold trenches, the days spent away from home, the battles fought not just for survival but for freedom. He thought about the promises he had once heard, that those who served would never be forgotten. But those promises now felt like distant echoes. When he arrived at the hospital, the staff quickly wheeled him inside. For a brief moment, relief washed over him. The bright lights, the doctors in white coats, the sound of machines beeping, it all gave him hope that maybe, just maybe, he would finally get the care he needed. But that hope was short-lived. At the reception desk, one of the hospital administrators asked for his insurance card. His voice shook as he admitted he didn't have one. The administrator's polite smile faded instantly. "Do you have any form of payment?" "Credit card? Savings?" the administrator asked, typing something into the computer. The old man lowered his eyes. He had nothing. He had spent everything he had on basic needs, and there was no family left to help him. The staff exchanged looks, their tone shifting from polite to distant. The doctors, who had first rushed to his side, now hesitated. They performed a few basic checks, but then began asking more questions about money than about his health. The old man could see the change in their eyes. He was no longer a patient to them. He was a problem. Lying on the hospital bed, he stared at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above him, but all he could hear was the sound of the administrator's words. "Without insurance or payment, we can only provide limited assistance, limited assistance." The phrase echoed in his mind. He had once given unlimited service to his country. He had fought without asking how much he would be paid, or whether there would be enough supplies. He had risked his life for people he did not even know. And now, in his weakest moment, the system that he believed in seemed unwilling to risk anything for him. As the hours passed, the old man felt more and more invisible. Nurses walked past his bed without stopping. Doctors discussed other patients with urgency and care, but when they came to him, their voices lowered. He caught snippets of conversation. No coverage. Can't keep him long. Already behind on bills. The neighbor who had brought him tried to argue. "He's a veteran," the neighbor said firmly. "He served this country. He deserves better." But the staff only nodded politely, offering vague responses. The truth was clear. They didn't want him there. The old man closed his eyes, trying to shut out the world around him. His chest tightened again, and he gasped for air. For a moment, he thought he might not make it through the night. He thought of his younger self, the man who had once stood tall and fearless. That man would never have imagined ending up here, begging silently for help that should have been given freely. He whispered a quiet prayer under his breath. Not for himself, but for the world. A world where men and women like him would not be forgotten. A world where compassion mattered more than money. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, each second dragging on. His neighbor sat by his side, holding his hand, trying to comfort him. "Don't give up," the neighbor whispered. "Something will change. It has to." But deep down, the old man wasn't sure. He had seen enough in his lifetime to know that change was not always guaranteed. Sometimes people fell through the cracks, no matter how much they had given. And right now, he felt like he was falling, slipping into a place where no one cared. Outside the hospital window, The city bustled with life. Cars honked, people hurried to work, children laughed on their way to school. The world kept moving, unaware of the silent struggle happening in that small hospital room. To the city, he was just another old man. But to himself, he was still that soldier who had once believed in promises. As night fell, the old man lay awake, staring into the darkness. The hospital lights dimmed, but his thoughts burned bright. He remembered the faces of his comrades, some who never made it back home. He wondered what they would think if they saw him now, alone, sick, and treated like a burden. His body trembled again, and he clutched his thin blanket tighter. He wished he could go back to those days when he was strong, when his presence commanded respect. But those days were gone. All he had now was the hope that somehow someone would see him not as a bill, but as a human being. And yet, beneath the pain and disappointment, a small spark of dignity remained. Even though the hospital staff looked past him, even though the system had turned its back, he still carried within him the pride of his service. He still carried the memories of standing tall for others, but the question that haunted him was simple. Who would stand tall for him now? The morning came heavy and cold for the old veteran. He had barely slept. The thin hospital blanket had done little to keep away the chill, and his body ached from the hard mattress beneath him. His breathing had grown rougher, his chest rising and falling with effort. Yet when the first nurse of the day came to check on him, she didn't stay long. She simply glanced at his chart, made a note, and walked away. He tried to call out to ask for help, but his voice cracked, barely above a whisper. He was thirsty, his lips dry, but no one offered him a sip of water. The neighbor, who had stayed as long as the hospital allowed, had been sent home the night before. Now he lay in silence, surrounded by strangers who acted as if he wasn't even there. Time passed slowly until, later that morning, a group of hospital staff approached his bed. Their expressions were not warm or concerned, they were distant, almost businesslike. One of them explained in a practiced tone that the hospital could not continue to keep him without payment. They said he had already received what they called basic care, and unless he could show proof of insurance or funds, they would need to discharge him. The old man's eyes widened. He tried to protest, his weak hands trembling as he reached out. "I'm not well enough to leave," he whispered. "Please, I need help." But his words seemed to fall flat. The staff avoided looking directly into his eyes, as if acknowledging his pain would make their decision harder. One of them repeated the phrase he had heard before. "We're sorry, but there's nothing more we can do without payment." "Sorry?" The word sounded hollow, like a door slamming shut in his face. Before he knew it, 2 security guards arrived. Their presence made his heart sink. He wasn't dangerous, he wasn't loud, he wasn't causing trouble. Yet here they were, standing tall and stern, as if ready to move him like a piece of unwanted furniture. The old man clutched the blanket around him, his frail body shivering. He wanted to tell them about his past, about the years he had given in service, about the battles he had survived so that others could live in peace. But the words caught in his throat. He was too tired, too weak. And deep down he wondered if it would even matter. Would they care? Would anyone care? Slowly the guards helped him up. His legs wobbled and pain shot through his chest. He begged them softly, "Please, not like this." "I can't." But their grip was firm, not cruel, just detached. They were following orders. They placed his few belongings into a plastic hospital bag, an old wallet, a worn-out jacket, and the pair of shoes he had arrived in. The sight of it broke something inside him. A lifetime of service, decades of sacrifice, and now all that he owned could fit into a single bag. As they escorted him down the hall, he noticed people staring. Some of the patients in nearby beds looked on with pity, their eyes filled with silent understanding. A few whispered among themselves, shaking their heads at the scene unfolding before them. The old man could feel the weight of their stares, but he also knew none of them could do anything to stop what was happening. When they reached the front doors of the hospital, the cold air hit him like a wall. His body shuddered and he hunched over, clutching his chest. The guards left him on a bench just outside the sliding doors. They gave him the plastic bag, muttered something about being careful, and walked back inside. And just like that, he was out. Alone. The old man sat there for a while, staring at the ground. His breathing was heavy and his mind swirled with questions. How had it come to this? How had a man who once stood strong for his country become a man pushed aside for not being able to pay? Passers-by began to notice him. Some slowed down, curious, while others hurried past without a second glance. A few even pulled out their phones, recording short videos of the fragile veteran sitting helplessly outside a hospital. Whispers filled the air. "Did they throw him out?" someone asked. "What happened to him?" Another voice murmured, but nobody stopped. Nobody offered him water or asked if he was all right. People were quick to talk but slow to act. The old man leaned back against the bench, clutching the thin blanket tighter. The city noise surrounded him. The honking of cars, the chatter of pedestrians, the beeping of crosswalk signals. It all seemed distant, almost unreal, as if he were watching the world through a foggy glass. His stomach growled with hunger, but he ignored it. His chest hurt more than his empty stomach. He closed his eyes for a moment, and memories rushed back. He remembered the battlefield, where he had once sat with his fellow soldiers sharing rations and stories, each of them watching each other's backs. No one was left behind then. No one was left alone. But here, in the heart of the city he had helped protect, he was left behind. A cold breeze swept through, making him shiver. He pulled his jacket tighter, but it was thin, barely enough to keep away the chill. The plastic bag at his feet rattled softly in the wind, a cruel reminder of how little he had left. Minutes turned to hours. The old man grew weaker, his head drooping forward as fatigue overtook him. At one point he coughed so hard he thought his chest might break. Still, no one from the hospital came out to check on him. No nurse, no doctor, no administrator. Once they had walked him out, he was no longer their concern. People kept passing by. Some looked at him with pity, others with annoyance, as if his presence was an inconvenience. A few children tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking why the old man was sitting there, but the parents quickly hushed them and walked faster. The veteran lifted his head weakly and looked up at the sky. The clouds had gathered, dark and heavy, threatening rain. He whispered to himself, "Is this how it ends? After everything, is this all there is?" His voice cracked, breaking into silence. His body slumped back against the bench. He felt so small, so invisible, like a shadow in a world that no longer remembered him. Yet even in that painful moment he held on to a sliver of hope, that maybe, just maybe, someone would notice. Someone would care. What he didn't know was that among the people walking by there was one man who had stopped. A man in a dark suit stood at a distance, watching quietly. His eyes didn't just see an old man sitting helpless outside a hospital. They saw something deeper. They saw a story, a life, a truth that could not be ignored. The veteran, too weak to lift his head again, did not see the man. He did not know that someone had finally noticed him, not with pity, not with indifference, but with intent. And while the old man sat on that bench, thinking his story had ended, the next chapter was quietly beginning. The old veteran sat on the bench outside the hospital, his body weak and his spirit heavy. He had lost track of time. The hours blended together, each one filled with pain, hunger, and the cold bite of the air around him. His hands trembled as he tried to keep the blanket wrapped around his frail body. People still walked by, some glancing for a moment, others pretending not to see. But what he didn't realize was that one man had been watching carefully from a distance. A tall figure in a dark suit stood near the entrance, not rushing past like everyone else. He had arrived at the hospital earlier for his own reasons. But as soon as he noticed the old man being escorted out by security, something inside him made him stop. Unlike the others, he didn't look away. The man in the suit leaned against a wall quietly, studying the scene. He saw the way the veteran struggled to sit upright, the way his chest heaved with every breath, the way his hands shook when he tried to adjust his blanket. He noticed the plastic bag on the ground, just a few belongings that spoke of a lifetime reduced to almost nothing. The more he watched, the heavier his heart grew. He wasn't just looking at a sick old man. He was looking at someone who had clearly carried a long, difficult journey. There was dignity in the veteran's face, even through the exhaustion. There was a story written in his tired eyes, a story that most people were too busy to see. The man in the suit slowly stepped closer, blending into the small crowd that occasionally gathered near the hospital doors. He overheard bits of conversation from passers-by. Some whispered, they threw him out because he couldn't pay. Others shook their heads and muttered, that's just how it is these days. But no one did anything. The suited man felt a mix of sadness and anger. He remembered his own father, who had also worn a uniform many years ago. His father had told him countless stories about courage, sacrifice, and brotherhood. He remembered sitting at the kitchen table as a boy, listening wide-eyed to those tales of service. His father had always said one thing that stuck with him. Never forget the ones who gave everything, because one day they might have nothing left. Now, standing outside the hospital, those words rang louder than ever. The veteran tried to shift his weight on the bench, groaning softly. The man in the suit couldn't stay still any longer. He walked over slowly, careful not to startle him. When he finally reached the bench, he knelt down slightly so his eyes met the old man's. For the first time in hours, the veteran saw someone looking at him not with pity, not with indifference, but with genuine concern. The man's voice was calm and gentle as he asked, "Sir, are you all right?" The veteran's lips trembled as he tried to speak. His voice came out weak, broken by pain. They sent me out, said I couldn't pay. I don't know what to do." The man in the suit felt a sharp ache in his chest at those words. He placed a steady hand on the veteran's shoulder and said softly, "Don't worry. You're not alone anymore." For a moment, the veteran stared at him, unsure if he could believe those words. After everything he had just been through, trust felt like a fragile thing. But there was something in the man's eyes, steady, honest, unwavering, that gave him a spark of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. The suited man turned his head toward the hospital doors. He had seen enough. Standing up straight, he walked with firm steps back inside the building. People noticed the change in his posture, the quiet authority in the way he moved. He wasn't just another visitor. He carried himself like someone who expected answers. Inside the hospital, he went straight to the reception desk. His voice, though calm, carried a weight that made people listen. "That man you put outside," he said. "Bring me the administrator right now." The staff hesitated, exchanging nervous looks. They weren't used to being confronted like this, especially not by someone who spoke with such certainty. Within minutes, the administrator appeared, adjusting his tie nervously as he approached. The man in the suit didn't waste time. He spoke clearly, his tone sharp enough to cut through the silence. "I watched what happened. You expelled a sick veteran because he couldn't pay. Do you realize what you've done? Do you realize who you just left to suffer outside your doors?" The administrator began to stammer, offering excuses. "Sir, we have policies. Without insurance or payment, there are limits to the care we can provide. We followed protocol." The suited man leaned in slightly, his voice steady but filled with intensity. "Protocol? Let me tell you what protocol looks like. Protocol is protecting the men who once protected all of us. Protocol is making sure no one who risked their life for this country is ever left to die on a bench. What you did out there wasn't protocol. It was abandonment." The staff standing nearby fell silent. Some lowered their heads, ashamed. Others looked stunned, as if hearing for the first time what their actions really meant. The man in the suit continued, his voice echoing across the reception area. "That veteran is someone's father, someone's brother, someone's friend. He is a human being who gave more than most of us ever will. And today, you treated him like trash because he couldn't hand you a credit card." The administrator tried again to explain, but the suited man raised a hand to stop him. "Enough, I don't want excuses. I want action. Admit him back into this hospital. Give him the treatment he needs. And if payment is what's standing in the way, then consider it handled. I will take responsibility for every single bill." Gasps rippled through the staff. The administrator blinked, caught off guard. You'll cover the expenses?" he asked, his voice small. The suited man nodded firmly. "Every cent, but understand this, it's not about money. It's about humanity. And today you failed at it." For a moment, the room was silent. No one moved. The weight of his words lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. Finally, the administrator cleared his throat and signaled to a nurse. "Bring him back inside. Prepare a room." The nurses hurried to obey, their faces a mix of relief and guilt. As the suited man turned to walk back outside, he felt the eyes of everyone in the room on him. Some looked ashamed, others looked inspired. But he didn't care about them right now. His focus was on the frail veteran waiting on the bench. When he stepped outside, the old man looked up, confusion written on his face. He hadn't expected the stranger to come back. But when he saw the determined expression in the man's eyes, his heart stirred with a fragile hope. The man knelt again and said softly, "You're going back in. You're going to get the care you deserve. I've taken care of it." The veteran's eyes filled with tears. His voice broke as he whispered, Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." The man smiled faintly. I don't need to know you to see your worth. My father once served just like you. He always told me to never turn my back on those who gave everything. Today, I'm keeping that promise." For the first time in a long while, the veteran felt something warm stir in his chest. Not just hope, but dignity. Someone had seen him. Someone had stood up for him. And as the nurses came to gently lift him from the bench, guiding him back inside, he realized his story wasn't over yet. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. The hospital doors slid open once more, and the veteran was brought back inside. This time not as an unwanted burden, but as a patient who finally had someone speaking up for him. The nurses guided him gently, placing him on a wheelchair and rolling him through the hallway. His weak hands clutched the thin blanket that had been wrapped around him, and though his body trembled, there was something new in his expression. Hope. The man in the suit walked closely beside him, never letting him feel alone for even a moment. Each step he took seemed to carry an unspoken promise. "You're not invisible anymore." The veteran glanced at him from time to time, his tired eyes searching for answers he couldn't quite put into words. Why would a stranger do this? Why would anyone step in when the world had turned away? They reached a private room. A bed had been prepared, clean sheets tucked neatly, a soft pillow waiting. The nurses carefully lifted him and settled him down. Machines were wheeled in, IV fluids prepared, and a doctor finally appeared, this time giving full attention to his condition. The old man felt the sting of a needle in his arm, the steady drip of medicine beginning to flow. For the first time in days, he felt like he was being treated as someone who mattered. The man in the suit stayed close, standing quietly by the corner of the room. He watched every detail, ensuring the staff didn't cut corners or show the same coldness they had earlier. His presence alone seemed to change everything. The doctors now spoke with seriousness. The nurses showed patience, and the administrator, who had once tried to excuse his actions, lingered nearby with guilt written all over his face. Hours passed as the veteran received treatment. The color slowly began to return to his cheeks, though his body was still fragile. He drifted in and out of sleep, the medicine easing his pain little by little. Each time he opened his eyes, he found the man in the suit still there, sometimes sitting in the chair by his bedside, sometimes pacing gently near the window. He never left. Eventually, when the room grew quiet, the veteran whispered weakly, "I thought I was finished. Left to die out there." His voice cracked with emotion. "I don't understand why you helped me." The man in the suit leaned forward, his tone calm but firm. "Because no one deserves to be treated the way you were treated, especially not someone who gave so much. You wore the uniform. You carried the weight of sacrifice. People like you should never be left alone in their weakest moment." Tears welled up in the veteran's eyes. He tried to wipe them away, but his hands trembled too much. The man gently handed him a tissue, showing respect without pity. "I don't have family anymore," the veteran admitted softly. "No one to speak for me. No one to fight for me. When they pushed me out, I thought that was it. I thought the world had finally forgotten me." The man's voice grew heavier, filled with quiet conviction. "You're not forgotten. You never were. People may look away, but that doesn't erase the truth of who you are and what you've done. Today I saw you, and I wasn't going to let them treat you like you didn't matter." Silence filled the room for a moment. The veteran's lips quivered as he whispered, "Why? Why care for a stranger?" The man's eyes softened. "Because I know what it means. My father served too. He went through things he rarely talked about, but I saw the scars inside and out. Before he passed, he told me something I never forgot. Take care of the ones who took care of us. When I saw you sitting there on that bench, I saw my father. I saw every promise he made me keep." The veteran's chest tightened, but not from pain this time, from emotion. His eyes glistened and his voice broke as he said, "Your father raised a good man." The suited man gave a small nod, but he didn't bask in the praise. His focus remained on the old soldier lying before him. As the hours went on, word began to spread through the hospital. Staff whispered in hallways about the man in the suit who had confronted the administration and forced them to do the right thing. Some felt ashamed of what they had allowed to happen, while others felt inspired, realizing they had forgotten the true purpose of their work: to heal, not to calculate. The veteran noticed subtle changes too. Nurses now checked on him more frequently. Doctors asked him how he felt instead of rushing through their questions. Even the meals brought to him were warm and carefully prepared, not the cold trays he had been given before. It was as if his humanity had been restored the moment someone stood up for him. Late into the evening, the man in the suit sat quietly at the bedside, watching the slow rise and fall of the veteran's chest. The hospital lights glowed softly, and for a while the world outside seemed far away. The veteran stirred and opened his eyes once more. "You should go home," he whispered, his voice weak but sincere. "You've done enough." The man shook his head. "Not yet. I'll leave when I know you're safe." The veteran's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Safe," he repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time in years. "It's been a long time since I felt that." The man in the suit leaned forward slightly, speaking with quiet determination. "From this moment on, you're not alone. I'll make sure you get the care you deserve, whatever it takes." The old soldier closed his eyes again, this time not from exhaustion but from a strange comfort. For years he had carried the weight of loneliness, believing no one would be there in his final days. But now, sitting in that hospital bed, he felt a warmth he hadn't known in decades, the warmth of being seen, valued, and defended. Meanwhile, outside the veteran's room, some of the hospital staff gathered, whispering among themselves. They had witnessed something unusual that day, something powerful. A stranger had reminded them of the humanity they had nearly forgotten in their rush to follow rules and protect profits. Many of them went home that night with heavy hearts, questioning their own choices, wondering if they too had looked past people who needed them most. But for the veteran, none of that mattered now. What mattered was simple: he was no longer invisible. He had found someone willing to stand tall for him when he couldn't stand for himself. As the night grew deeper, the veteran drifted into a peaceful sleep. The machines hummed softly, medicine flowed into his veins, and the man in the suit remained by his side like a silent guardian. The fight he had once faced alone was no longer his to bear, and while he slept, unaware, a quiet transformation had begun, not just in his life, but in the hearts of those who had witnessed the moment when dignity triumphed over indifference. Days slowly passed in the hospital room. With each sunrise, the veteran grew a little stronger. The doctors who had once looked past him now checked on him with care, and the nurses who had once hurried by now lingered, offering him warm smiles along with his medicine. The man in the suit had changed everything. His presence had shifted not only the treatment the old soldier received, but also the attitude of the people working there. The veteran noticed the difference. He could taste it in the warm meals, feel it in the way his bandages were changed gently, and hear it in the voices of those who spoke to him now with respect. His body was still frail, but his spirit felt lighter. For the first time in many years, he no longer felt invisible. One quiet morning, as sunlight poured through the blinds, he opened his eyes to find the man in the suit sitting by the window. He had stayed through the nights, sometimes dozing lightly in the chair, but never leaving for long. The veteran's voice was soft but steady as he said, "I don't know how to thank you." The man turned to him with a calm smile. "You don't have to thank me. You've already paid your dues a long time ago. What I did was nothing compared to what you've done for all of us." The veteran's eyes glistened. Still, no one else saw me that way. No one else remembered. The man's voice grew firmer. People forget too easily. They forget the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the battles fought far from home. But I didn't forget. And I won't let others forget either. Later that day, news crews appeared outside the hospital. The story of the veteran who had been expelled because he couldn't pay had begun to spread, first among bystanders who recorded the moment, then through social media, and finally to reporters who were shocked by what they learned. Cameras captured the sight of the frail man resting in his hospital bed, cared for only because a stranger in a suit had stepped in when the system failed him. The hospital administration tried to explain, but their words sounded hollow. The public was outraged. People asked how a veteran could be left on the street after giving his life to service. Letters poured in. Messages of support filled the airwaves. The story touched hearts across the city, and soon across the nation. But the veteran didn't care about headlines or reporters. What mattered to him was far simpler. He cared about the kindness of the man who had stayed by his side. He cared about the nurses who now treated him with dignity. And he cared about the feeling long lost but now returned, of being seen and valued. One evening, as the man in the suit sat by his bedside, the veteran whispered, "I thought I was going to die on that bench, cold, alone, forgotten. I had accepted it. But then you showed up. His voice trembled, but his eyes were steady. "You gave me something I had lost. You gave me back my worth." The man in the suit reached out and placed a hand gently on his arm. "You always had worth. Don't ever believe otherwise. The world may fail sometimes, but that doesn't erase who you are. You're a hero, whether they remember it or not." The veteran closed his eyes, letting those words sink into his heart. For years he had carried pain not only in his body but also in his spirit, the pain of being forgotten. But now as he lay in that bed, he felt a strange peace, as if the heavy weight he had carried for so long had finally been lifted. Over the next few weeks, his health improved. Slowly, strength returned to his hands, color returned to his face, and his voice grew stronger. He still had a long road ahead, but the difference between despair and hope was clear in every breath he took. The man in the suit continued to visit every day. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in silence. The veteran shared stories of his younger years, memories of battlefields, of friends lost and promises made. The man listened carefully, honoring each word as if it were sacred. One afternoon, the veteran looked out the window at the busy street below. His voice carried both sadness and gratitude as he said, "So many of us gave our best years. Some never came home, and yet it takes a stranger to remind the world we mattered." The suited man nodded slowly. "That's why this story has to be told. Not just for you, but for every veteran who has ever been left behind. The world needs to see what happened to you so it never happens again." True to his word, the man began working quietly behind the scenes. He contacted organizations, charities, and community groups, sharing the veteran's story and rallying support. Soon, promises of help poured in. Offers of housing, medical care, and financial aid arrived, not just for the old soldier, but for others like him. What began as one act of compassion grew into something much larger, a movement to honor and protect those who had once protected everyone else. When the veteran heard about these efforts, he was overwhelmed. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he whispered, "I thought my life was ending in silence. I never imagined my struggle could bring light for others." The man in the suit smiled warmly. "Sometimes the darkest moments carry the seeds of change. Your story woke people up, and because of you, others will not suffer the way you did." The veteran's heart swelled with pride. For so long he had felt forgotten, but now he realized his life still had meaning. Even in his weakest moment, his existence had sparked a fire of compassion that spread far beyond the walls of the hospital. One night, as he rested peacefully, he thought back to that cold bench outside. He remembered the despair, the loneliness, the belief that no one would come, and then he remembered the hand that had reached out, the voice that had promised he wasn't alone. That moment had saved him, not just his body but his spirit. The next morning, when he opened his eyes and saw the man in the suit once again sitting by his side, he whispered, "You didn't just save me. You reminded me who I was. You reminded me that I was never truly forgotten." The man leaned closer and replied, "You'll never be forgotten again. Not while I'm here, and not while people remember what you stood for." The veteran smiled through tears, his voice trembling but strong. "Then I can rest easy knowing I mattered, knowing my story will live on." And so, from that day forward, the old soldier was no longer just a man who had been abandoned outside a hospital. He became a symbol, a reminder of dignity, sacrifice, and the power of one stranger's compassion to change everything. The man in the suit kept his promise. He made sure the veteran received the care he needed, and more importantly, he made sure his story was told. Not as a tale of despair, but as a testimony of hope, redemption, and humanity. And though the veteran's body remained frail, his spirit stood tall once more, knowing that his life had not been in vain.